micro lecture on how you define and choose segments. Kind of look at some of the criteria that companies used when they actually decide which segments to go after. It's one thing to identify them, but then you have to decide which ones you really want to go after. So it begins with understanding the marketplace and then gather information on the customer's perspective. A segment may look desirable in terms of the size and growth, but be saturated with competitors and not consistent with firm goals. So um, obviously, it's got to line up with the segmentation choices you make have to line up with the firm itself. Um, and the way to evaluate it is, does the segmentation scheme have enough data to identify the segments? That's actually not normally that big of a problem anymore because with all the data that we collect, but it has to be the right kind of data. So there's lots and lots of different things we can look at, but and we can buy certain kinds of data. We can overlay data onto the information that we already have in our systems. But in today's world with AI and particularly big data, there's lots of ways to get at data for segmentation purposes. Um, there are databases out that give access to specific people within your chosen segments. And those things are increasingly available. Does the segmentation scheme have is it profitable? It has to give you some chance of profitability. Size matters, but so does frequency and depth of purchases, price sensitivity, segment stability, growth potential, competitive intensity. There's all kinds of things that go into determining whether a segment is profitable to go after or not. Um, and you use as much information as you possibly can to estimate what the segment value is. But be careful not to define it too narrowly, as we talked about before, to determine what matters to your product. You have to be super careful about that. I've seen people really over target and over segment and end up with a fairly small piece of the pie. Um, does the segmentation scheme fit within corporate goals? Now that really matters a lot. You have to understand what your corporate, what your organization's strategies are and goals. Um, is it actionable? Can you actually design something for that segment? Is it common to link usage, attitudinal? There are all kinds of variables to demographic variables to make the segment more actionable, because actionable is really ultimately the important thing. So you could define means to segment a market, but they have to be meaningful. They have to be something you can use. Realistically, a lot of organizations have more than a single segment that they go after. And I know for the purposes of our exercise, we're approaching it like there's only a single segment we're trying to define. But that happens quite often, frequently, that there are multiple segments in the marketplace, and you have to think about, it's like, well, what am I trying to do with it? So some organizations, it makes sense that they have some breadth of strategy in serving more than one segment, because they can't just concentrate on one in particular and make it too small for them. They need to take a broader look. So computer companies, for example, make monitors ultra compatible so that they can be sold, and desktop packages are used as a second monitor for laptop users, all different kinds of things. So their segments are varied based on the product. Um, there's a depth strategy involved with it, that where you want to serve one segment really, really well. High-end grocers, for example, know their shoppers will want organic produce and fair trade coffees and cosmetics that haven't been animal tested. All these things are hot buttons for certain segments within the marketplace. And if you can serve one of those well, you can be very successful. And then you can have a tailored strategy that has different products for different segments. So, and not surprisingly, a lot of companies do this, is that they have their original product, but then they come up with a product or line extensions to actually go after different types of segments. Using the example that we talked about in the last one, Toyota actually launched a brand called Scion, which they felt like would approach a younger market that was not responding particularly well to Toyota's offers, and decided to come up with a whole new brand, which is a pretty big decision to make for a company like Toyota, but they did it because they knew that's how they wanted to get after it. So I'm asking a question here. Which segment here is the target of this product? A minivan, typical minivan. Is it Miss Soccer Mom, or is it Mr. Midlife Crisis? Well, clearly it's that product is been created, and the segment that it appeals to is the soccer mom. Okay, so we understand that. Now we have uh, a red Corvette convertible that obviously appeals to certain people. Does that appeal to Miss Soccer Mom or does that appeal to Mr. Midlife Crisis? And I'm going to say it appeals to Mr. Midlife Crisis. I always contended that Corvettes were largely sold to uh, men in what we call midlife crisis, which is a fancy way of saying, I'm getting old. So Amazon is just awesomely good at this. I mean, they really, really know how to segment, and they really know which segments to go after. And because they have this wealth of information. This is something called Amazon Warehouse Services, which are just a ton of information that they keep available to them. They're like true big data, and they use it for all different kinds of things, doing modeling, all different types of things. But they basically are doing it to segment and understand which customers are going to be most interested in what offers and what things that they do. And I would just tell you, they're amazingly good at it. Okay, so customers' varying preferences. Not surprisingly, it is usually impossible to please all your customers with one product. Segments can be formed on nearly any kind of differentiating information: the demographics, geographic data, the psychographics, behavioral. For our project, we're going to concentrate on demographics and psychographics because we can actually find something out about those. Segmentation schemes should be used based on data sustained by a database to help access the customers, sorry, profitable enough to serve. They're big enough that they're appealing to us. They're sensible with respect to larger corporate goals and planning. You do have to make sure that everything fits in, and they're actionable. Okay. And what do we do with our segments? We do targeting. We talk about how we actually do targeted marketing to our segments, and that's what we'll talk about next. If you have any questions about what's involved with choosing segments or from the last one, defining segments, please let me know. That's a really important part of what our milestone one is all about.